Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. I am Rabbi Oren Hayon. I'm delighted that you're spending a bit of time with us this evening to help me celebrate and take part in the very, very exciting opportunity to launch this new book with all of you together. This new book that I'm so delighted to have been a part of, called Inscribed: Encounters with the Ten Commandments. I'm joined this evening by a few friends and folks that have played an important part in creating this book. But the people that I'm most excited about having with me this evening are you. I'm really glad that you've taken the time to join me, to help celebrate, to learn a little bit about the book, and to hear a little bit about all the people whose great ideas and hard work went into making the book a reality. So I'm really delighted that you're here with us this evening, whether you're joining us on the Congregation Emanu webpage or Facebook. We're really, really delighted that you're here. Speaking of the various ways that we're able to connect electronically this evening, if you are joining us through the stream on Facebook, I want to make you aware that later on in our evening together, we'll have the opportunity to do a little bit of interactive Q&A. So if you're watching the video on Facebook, if you have questions or feedback or things that you'd like to share with me or our panelists, you can put those questions or comments right in the chat box there on Facebook. Those will then make their way to me, and I can help relay your questions or feedback to any of those contributors that we're sharing this evening with. So make sure you've familiarized yourself with the layout on Facebook and found the chat box where you can add your questions and comments. The other thing that I want to say before we get into the program this evening is a word of acknowledgement. We were supposed to have been joined this evening by Rabbi Annie Belfort, who's one of the exceptional contributors to the book. She wrote a chapter for the book that is exceptional. Unfortunately, because of a death in her family, Rabbi Belfort's not able to be with us this evening. We miss her very much tonight. Of course, she made the right choice to be with her family, to do the work of grief. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that I know all of us send our good wishes and our condolences and whatever peace and comfort we can to Rabbi Belfort as she and her family do the work of grieving their loss. This evening, what I have in mind for our time together is that I want to spend a bit of time talking to you about the book and how it came into being, to share a little bit with you about what it was that excited me about a book about the Ten Commandments, to tell you a little bit about what you can expect when you get the book in your hands, and then to introduce you to a couple of other important people who have played a part in the creation of this book. And then once the panelists have had a chance to share a few of their thoughts, as I said, we'll open up the floor for some Q&A, and I'll share with you a little bit of information at the end about how you can get a hold of the book and how you can, I hope, use the book as part of your own ongoing learning. The other possibility that I want to share with you is, if you're not able to access Facebook to put in your questions or comments there, if you're able to use email, our program director, Jason Plotkin, has graciously offered to relay some of your questions by email if that's easier for you. And you can send questions or comments to Jason by emailing jasonp@emmanuelhouston.org. So however you get in touch with us, either by email or by the Facebook chat, we'll be happy to hear your thoughts and answer your questions. So I want to talk a little bit about how the book came into being and what was behind the scenes before the book was a reality. Really, the first seed in the growth of this book was the invitation I received several years ago to participate in writing for a different publishing project. And that was another book published by the CCAR Press, whose topic was the 7 days of creation. I was invited by my friend and colleague, Rabbi Ben David, who is the editor of that book. He invited me to contribute a section of the book about the first day of creation. It was a great project. I had a lot of fun writing for the book. And it caused me to do a bit of thinking about how the experience of creation fits into the Jewish people's understanding of its own mythic and formative history. Certainly the experience of creation in the book of Genesis marks the initial moment of the Jewish people's understanding of what history is, how it functions, and where the Jewish people finds itself in the sweep of human and cosmic history. There are a couple of other points in Jewish history that we understand to be formative and pivotal in the formation of Jewish self-identity and self-determination. The first one is creation. The next moment that we understand to have been pivotal and critical in our national history is the redemption from slavery in Egypt. We know that that experience of liberation and freedom makes a core component of who we are. We talk about it every time we pray. We celebrate it with great detail and great richness at our Passover Seders. And that experience of freedom and liberation from slavery, I think, makes up a core sense of our identity and our own sense of right and wrong, our own sense of empathy and identification with others who are marginalized and made vulnerable. And the third pivotal watershed moment in Jewish national history is the one that forms the framework of this book, and that is the moment of revelation at Sinai, when the Jewish people are given directions and instructions for how to live through that moment of contact between heaven and earth when God reveals commandments to Moses on Sinai. So the reason that I was especially taken by the Sinai moment as the topic for the book that I was most excited about is that for me, the formation of the Jewish people into a nation doesn't become complete and doesn't become fully fleshed out until Sinai. Yes, the experience of slavery in Egypt and the redemption from our suffering and oppression binds us together as a community, but it's not until we receive Torah that we really become a people. And the reason for that, I believe, is that freedom doesn't just mean the absence of oppression or pain or coercion. Freedom requires having the ability to tell your own story. And for me, my understanding of the Jewish people's freedom, therefore, doesn't become completely manifest until the Sinai moment. We haven't become a fully free, independent, self-determined people until we have the ability to take possession of and to tell our own national story. The Sinai moment marks the beginning of that process because Torah, after all, is our story. And it's at Sinai that our relationship with our own story, our relationship with ourselves as writers and readers, as learners and teachers of our own Jewish national story, that's when that all becomes concrete and becomes made manifest in our national life for the first time. That's the first time when we personally recognize how important it is that we ourselves participate in the sacred process of learning and teaching. Because after all, in Jewish life, learning is as much, if not more, of a devotional act than, let's say, prayer. Jewish study is something that our sages, modern and ancient, have understood must comprise a primary component of Jewish life. The Jew is always in relationship with Torah, whatever that means in the many different forms that it takes. Learning is a devotional act. I'll get back to that a little bit more in a moment because I think that helped inspire the format for the book. But the last reason that I think the Sinai moment, the experience of revelation of the Ten Commandments, is so significant is that unlike the other moments in Jewish national life and Israelite ancient communal life, is that the Sinai moment is deeply and intrinsically democratic. The Torah makes a very, very clear point of telling us that the commandments were revealed in the sight and in the hearing of all Israel. The entire nation was there, and the Torah makes a great point to emphasize that all of us were there to be a part of the experience when Torah was revealed on Sinai. Similarly, all of us have an equal share in it, and all of us have an equal responsibility to continue learning and teaching and propagating its wisdom and its laws. I love that. I find that very, very moving personally, and I find it very formative in the kind of rabbinate that I want to have in this community and as I make my way through my rabbinic work. That learning is democratic. The access to Jewish Torah, Jewish wisdom, and Jewish insight is something that is open to all of us. I find that very moving, and I find it quite inspiring and humbling. So why this book now, and why are we especially talking about it this evening as we make our way through the Jewish calendar? I think that the Jewish calendar offers us an opportunity tonight in particular to talk about this book, because we are in the process of making our way from Passover toward Shavuot. We're making our way from the celebration of Revelation, the celebration of redemption that I spoke about a moment ago, the celebration of our freedom, and we're making our way toward Shavuot, which will take place just at the end of this month. Shavuot, of course, is the harvest festival that's been transformed into a celebration of revelation, celebration of receiving Torah at Sinai. And so in this particular time on the Jewish calendar, all of us as a Jewish nation, as a Jewish world, are making our way through freedom toward the opportunity to take ownership of Torah. So this is, I think, a perfect time for us to be talking about the Ten Commandments, for us to be talking about how they're relevant and important and how they relate to all of our lives today, not just for rabbis or for scholars or for people who make their lives in the Jewish community, but for all of us. Again, it connects to that deeply democratic nature of Jewish learning that I mentioned a moment ago. And so lastly, I think the thing that I want to share with you that is so special about the book relates to both the democratic nature of the Jewish learning and about the collective experience of making our way from liberation toward redemption, and that toward revelation, rather. And that is that the makeup of the book is that we take each of the 10 commandments individually, one at a time, and each of the commandments is presented and treated in either a duet or a trio of essays that were contributed by authors with a wide variety of backgrounds. The contributing authors are Jewish professionals, some are academics, some are thinkers, some are chaplains from all different Jewish backgrounds and levels of observance. And when all of these chapters and all of these contributors weave their works together, what results is an enormously diverse and vibrant tapestry of Jewish thought and Jewish ideas. And taken as a whole, then the collection becomes a real celebration of the deep diversity of Jewish life. I hope that it engenders in its readers a deep appreciation for how diverse and how richly varied the Jewish experience is in America today. And it reminds us that no matter who we are, we have something to learn from everybody else. And conversely, no matter how little we think we may have to contribute, we have some Torah to teach. Each of us has some Torah inside us that someone else in the world needs. And it's our invitation and our obligation to find a way to put our small bit of Torah into the world so that somebody else can learn from it. So I'm deeply excited about the product. It was a great experience to create the book as a process as well. It gave me the opportunity to learn from and speak with folks that I have admired and looked up to for a very long time. It's like those fantasy thought experiments you have when you imagine, if I could invite 20 people in the world to a dinner party, who would I want at my table? Well, in this book, you're going to get a chance to see who it is that I would have at my table, to sit and think about the problems of the world, to discuss the big ideas in spiritual life and in political life. And I'm really excited to invite you to that table as well, so that you can have a chance to get to know some of these amazing, wonderful thinkers whose essays have been contributed to the book. And so now I'm going to turn the floor over in just a moment to Rabbi Hera Person. I wanted to say a word about Hera because she was one of the people who I admire so greatly and from whom I take such great joy, and whose friendship as well as her leadership is very, very important to me. So Rabbi Person today serves as the chief executive of the CCAR. That's the Central Conference of American Rabbis, our rabbis union for all Reform rabbis in North America. And so we are in the presence of some very significant leadership here from our movement. The reason that I'm excited about Rabbi Person's joining us this evening is twofold. First of all, because she is the executive of our rabbis union, the leader of all Reform rabbis in North America. But also, before she made her way into this role, Hera served as the chief strategy officer of the CCAR, overseeing the communications department. And in the past, the way that our work really first began together, she was the publisher at the press. So Rabbi Person has had her hands on virtually every recent book in the library that's come out from our Reform Movement's press. If you're familiar with anything that our press has put out, you know that it's done with an exceedingly high level of professionalism and very high quality, and all of the rigor and high caliber excellence that our movement can boast in its publications. Much of that credit goes to Rabbi Person. So I'm really delighted that she has taken some time from her evening this evening to spend some time with me and with you. I'm going to turn the floor over to Rabbi Person so she can share a few thoughts about this book, perhaps, and maybe where she sees it fitting into the overall work of our conference. Rabbi Person, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Oren. I'm really excited about this book, and I have been from the start. So when Rabbi Hayon first spoke to me about this idea, I was really excited about it because I saw that it had a lot of potential, and I'm so excited to see how it came out, what happened to it as it sort of took life. I think one of the things that is that sort of sparked my interest right from the start is the idea of which you actually speak about in your introduction, the idea that the 10 Commandments are there not for us to memorize, but for us to engage with, that they're really this central text of who we are and who we've been throughout history, and that they shape so much of the way that we live as Jews. And I particularly like that idea because in part, I remember as a child being asked or being told to memorize the 10 Commandments, that was like a thing that we had to do in religious school. We didn't really talk a lot about them, but we had to memorize them. And then I remember learning that other faith traditions had a different order of the commandments, or a different sort of numbering system of the commandments, which left me very confused, but really intrigued. And I think that was one of the first moments where I realized that idea that you talk about so much, this idea that, they are really there not just for these rules for us to sort of know by rote, but really to infuse our lives with meaning, which means digging into them and understanding all that it is about them, from the sort of textual basis of the language. What does the language mean? Why is it phrased this way? How did the rabbis understand the order and break it into that number 10? How does it infuse so much about who we are and how we live our lives even today? So that was one of the first things. I also love that this is not a stuffy book. So Rabbi Hayon really went out and found interesting people among our rabbis, but also people in other fields, and people who could really connect the real world with these ancient texts, finding ways to connect to the way we live, what we know as people, and to make it come alive, to make it still relevant and fresh for us today. And I love the way that you did that, and the way that all the contributors did that. You also talk about this idea of the Torah as, or really the whole Hebrew Bible, as midrash on God's revelation of the commandments at Sinai. That's such a wonderful concept, this idea that the 10 Commandments are really that central text, and everything else is commentary on that help us dig deep and understand and make meaning and put into context what these commandments are. I think it's a wonderful way to look at our text and at our engagement with text. You talked a little bit about Shavuot, and it's so relevant this very moment because we are on this journey, this sort of march through the desert, but not a march in the sense of like a straight line from here to there. It's this journey of wandering that takes way longer than it should take, and it's full of all kinds of challenges along the way. And it's about getting ready to receive revelation, right? We sort of come out of Egypt. We're this ragtag group. We have so much to learn, and we have so much growth and maturity to do as a people in order to get revelation, in order to get these commandments. And so right now we're in that moment of making that journey, of doing that learning. And so this book really helps us fulfill that part of our challenge, that understanding what it means to be part of this people, to be part of this community, so that by the time we get to Sinai on Shavuot, by the time we get to the foot of the mountain, we have some sense of what we're being asked to do, how we're being asked to live our lives, what we're being asked to connect ourselves to in this very, very deep way. And last, I will just talk for a minute about the importance of this book in the whole library that the CCAR Press puts out for the Reform movement and for the Jewish community as a whole. We have lots of different kinds of books that we do. We do liturgical books, and then we do books that we call our sort of sacred text books. And this really is an important anchor in that collection of sacred texts, because for all the reasons that we've just been talking about, and that I know we will continue to talk about, the Ten Commandments are so central to our sacred text. So the fact that we have this book that's so rich and deep with different ideas and commentary about the Ten Commandments and how we connect to the Ten Commandments it's been a missing piece in our sacred text series, and I'm so glad that we have this. Thank you so much, Rabbi Hayon. Thank you to all the contributors for being part of this.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that we're together, and it really means a lot to have you here this evening. It really feels like a real strong vote of confidence in the book and in the work that led to its publication. Thank you so much for being here, Rabbi Person. I want to remind you again that if there are thoughts or questions that you want to share with any of us, to go ahead and put your questions or your comments in the chat box on the Facebook stream, if that's where you're watching it, or as a reminder, if it's easier for you to share those questions by email, you can put your questions in an email to jason@jasonp@emmanuelhouston.org. And now I want to introduce our next panelist, our next speaker this evening. We had a number of really, really terrific contributors that wrote for the book, as I mentioned. I thought it would be especially exciting for us to get a chance to spend some time with one of our contributing authors who comes from right here in our neighborhood, in our region. So I'm really delighted to get a chance to introduce you to Rabbi Jonathan Siger. Rabbi Siger wears a lot of different hats, a lot of different yarmulkes. He is the spiritual leader of Congregation Jewish Community North. He also serves in a rabbinic function at the Hillel at Texas A&M, and maybe most relevantly and most significantly for the chapter that he contributed, Rabbi Siger is also the lead chaplain for one of the lead chaplains for Harris County Sheriff's Office. So Rabbi Siger, I'm really glad you're here. Again, similarly, as a friend and as a colleague and co-contributor, I'm so happy that you're here and that you've given us some time on this evening. I want to turn the floor over to you so you can share a little bit with everyone here about what you wrote, why you wrote it, and maybe share a bit of reading with us.
Absolutely. First off, it is a pleasure to be with everybody. I am so thrilled to be able to participate. And in terms of one of the thoughts right off the bat is that I'm sad and of course understand that Rabbi Belfort can't be with us. And knowing that originally this was going to be, I think, more of a Houston regional event, and circumstances have forced it to be more accessible to people perhaps, and more widely viewed and more widely participated in, which is wonderful. But it also reminds me of just how humbled I was and just moved to see the other contributors to this volume and to the work. This is truly a remarkable collection of thinkers, and I'm rather glad I didn't ask at the outset when I was given the opportunity who else is contributing, because it's, if you'll pardon the phrase, it's a murderer's row of thinkers here, and I would have for sure gotten some cold feet. And I know some of them are actually viewing this, and it's just so fulfilling and encouraging, as well as a machaye, as we say, to really give a spark of life back to you to participate in something of this quality and of this importance. And I am deeply grateful for everyone's work to make this happen and for the opportunity to participate. So I was asked to handle something of no great import, the prohibition of murder, to take on the sixth commandment and come at it from the angle of police violence. And as I have been the lead volunteer chaplain for the Harris County Sheriff's Office in our district, in the northern part of the county for the last 8 or 10 years, now and had done some in Florida as well, it seemed like a logical place for me to put some thought and some effort. And it's a difficult subject, to be sure. And I found myself in an interesting position because I wanted to be fair. I was trying to thread the needle. On one hand, as a movement, as a group of thinkers and socially oriented clergy members and lay leaders that are deeply committed to a society built on justice and fairness and equity, we know that there are real problems with policing in America. And at the same time, the work of law enforcement and law enforcement personnel and the realities of that job are something that are intimately known to me. And I have a rather strong affiliation for and affection for that work and the people that do that work, even though I'm well aware of the issues that exist. So I found myself in a place where I was, as I said, trying to thread the needle. I wanted to be informative and critical, as well as an apologist in the classic sense of it, not making apologies, but literally providing some insight and a sense of what it is that we're talking about. And I will share this one thought before I do a brief reading from my essay, that one of the things that has struck me again and again is when I'm riding in patrol cars, one of the first things that a deputy asks me, almost invariably, once we get to the point where they start to trust me and feel that I'm not there to just inform on them or be a critical person, but I'm really there to learn from them and to listen to their story and be moral support to them as they go about their job, is the problem with killing. And they say, but the Bible says thou shalt not kill. And I explain to them, well, actually, that's not what the Bible says. It says you shouldn't kill unless you have a really, really good reason to. And you're not supposed to murder. And there's a difference between the two. And they say, oh, I can see that. And you can see it doesn't make it easier for them. They're not looking forward to being in a position where they have to choose between killing and being killed. But you can see that this understanding of what the commandment is meant to teach us, or what the direction actually was intended to be, you can see the importance of the work that chaplains can do, and also the importance of having a Jewish voice out there in the marketplace of theology. So leaving that for the time being, I'll just, I think, offer a little bit of that essay. One thing about police-involved shootings is that they tend to happen really quickly. Police officers have about a second and a half to get a sense of whether they are in danger, to draw their gun, and to get it on target. If you're a police officer, by the time you see a gun pointed at you, you're already in big trouble. It takes less than half a second for someone holding a gun to turn it at an officer and pull the trigger. In a study entitled Reasonableness and Reaction Time, psychologists found that even when the officer has a weapon drawn and pointed at a suspect, 61% of the time, the officer fired at the same time or later than the assailant. This is because, as other studies have demonstrated, action is always faster than reaction. Police officers must be assertive and commanding in the face of uncertainty. Every traffic stop and every knock on the door of a house where a domestic disturbance has been reported has the potential to end in injury or death. Detainees often fight arrest, especially while drunk or on drugs, or not on the right drugs, and angry people who feel they have nothing to lose are dangerous and unpredictable. Preservation of life is the police officer's first priority, and the life of the officer must come first. At the same time, instances of police misconduct, negligence, and incompetence have resulted in the wrongful deaths of too many people for a society committed to justice for all to ignore. And I go from there. And I will say one of the things that I found most interesting when I was doing the work for the chapter and the rewriting, other than the exercise in trying to be relatively brief, I want to thank all the editors that were involved, paring down what could have been a novel into the essay that appears in the book, was some of the teaching that went on in the Talmud, where they describe what you do with a home invader and the importance of giving someone the benefit of the doubt, but also understanding that if someone is breaking into your house in the middle of the night, that there's not a lot of room for doubt or second guessing, and balancing those two questions. And it's an interesting study, and I think we did a good job of it with the essay. But there's obviously a lot more that can be said. And the one thing that I took away from it, on top of just the interest and the questions that are raised, was this idea that we need to look at our police force, and they need to view themselves as almost parental figures. That the relationship, not to say that they're infantilizing the rest of us, but that there is a responsibility when you are a guardian of the peace and trying to keep social order, that the relationship should be familial, and also one that's based in the kind of love that parents have for children and that children have for parents. And especially in uncertain days that we find ourselves now, where we're also dealing with life and death questions, although they're not involving gun violence, they're involving epidemiology and safety from the coronavirus and civil unrest that we seem to be on the verge of. That's very instructive. So it's a good time for this book. And I'm personally very grateful for it, not just for that essay, but for the rest of it.
Thank you so much. I love hanging out with you. I love hanging out with you here on the video stream. I love hanging out with you and with your words when we're doing the work of editing and putting the book together. And I just, for those of us that don't have the opportunity or the calling to spend time in a squad car, to get a chance to see that world through your eyes is really, it's really a privilege. So thanks for sharing that. A reminder to those of you that are with us, if you want to put a question in the chat box, now is the time to do so. We're going to move to pivot to asking a couple of questions. I have a couple of questions that I want to put to the floor to both of my colleagues here. Actually, Rabbi Siger, as long as you're here, let me start with you. One of the things that I had to consider when I was putting the work together, just as has everybody that writes about the Ten Commandments, is that there's a little bit of a translation issue. In English, we call this chunk of text from the Bible, we call them the Ten Commandments. In Hebrew, they are called Aseret HaDibrot, which 10 is the same. Aseret means the 10, but Dibrot does not mean commandments, right? Dibrot means something like utterances or sayings or expressions or something like that. So in Hebrew already, just from the name of this chunk of text, we have a sense that we're reading a different category of literature. It's not the 10 commandments in Hebrew, it's the 10 utterances. I think it's an especially interesting thing to think about as Reform Jews, because Reform Jews have a little bit of a slippery relationship with commandedness. Depending on who you are, depending on your background or how you live out your theology, some of us are more comfortable than others, feeling like we're in a relationship with God in which one of us is commanded and the other is the commander. So I wonder, if it doesn't feel too vulnerable, I wonder, John, if you can talk a little bit about what your own sense of commandedness and commandment, how that plays into your own theology. It's interesting to hear you talk a little bit about the power dynamic, specifically when you're talking about police-involved violence. There's always a question of power, and the fifth commandment, the fifth of the Dibrot about murder, also obviously understands that there are situations where there are power differentials. So I wonder if can you share a little bit about sort of how you feel about, do you feel that you're commanded? Do you feel that's an important part of your theology as a Jew, as a rabbi?
I try to. I think we struggle with it. I think that feeling fully Americanized, I think we tend to walk on that razor's edge of antinomianism, right? This is a free country, it's a free religion, I can do whatever I want. I'm Jewish, so whatever I do is Judaism. And those of us that were blessed to be educated in Cincinnati, rubs against the Rhinesian idea, right? But there's this on a humorous side, I joke with people, I say, well, however we translate it, we can't translate it as the 10 suggestions. Like, it's a really good idea not to murder people, but we all have bad days, and some days just, some things need to be coveted. It doesn't work that way. I've always tried to frame it for myself in a sense of responsibility, that it comes down to this idea of covenant, which is a little bit broader than the 10 Commandments itself. And that idea that we talk about summing up religious ideas, but if we believe that we have a role to play in creation, if we believe that we are part of a sacred covenant, that Brit gives us responsibilities, and we have a job to do. And when we're constantly reminding ourselves, even with things like the hamotzi, that everything belongs to the creator, everything belongs to God as we understand that idea. And if we're not doing our job, then all the blessings we get are basically stealing from our employer. And that gives us a responsibility. I struggle with the idea of commandedness because some of the rigidity, if we fall into that trap of we do it because I said so, is a bit of, I think it's a bit of a cop-out. At least I feel that way. I understand that it's comforting and it makes it easier than sitting there and wrestling with it and figuring out the best way to approach the idea that the text is giving us or that halacha gives us. But I think, as you alluded to early on, I think the study and the wrestling is part of it. I mean, the very idea is to be engaged in that, actively engaged in it and experimenting, finding new ways to carry that out. I think that's the commandedness. The commandedness is to do something with it, to engage in a struggle. The only thing you can't do is quit struggling and quit trying to find ways to make these ancient values and the texts and the teachings and the commandments live in you, even if we may do them in ways that may differ even markedly from our more, to use a jargony word, which I know we're trying to avoid, but orthopractic or more traditional co-religionists.
Yeah,
but that for me is the struggle.
I love that. If I can get Rabbi Person back online too, I'm going to ask her a similar question. So Harry, you professionally and symbolically represent the Reform Rabbinate as a whole entity. What do you? And this is something that I'm sure you get. This is a stick you get beat with all the time. Reform rabbis or Reform Jews believe that anything goes. That's what it means to be Reformed, is that there isn't a sense of commandedness, that there's no sense of authority except one's own desire for comfort or joy or pleasure. How do you, what's the, as a representative of the Reform Rabbinate, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I love what you said, Jonathan, because my answer to that question would be very, very similar. And I think it feeds into this question too, that, reform isn't about the easy way out, right? I mean, we all know that, but it has to be said over and over again, I'm finding. And, that it is about asking the questions and about the struggle. So it's really about the engagement with the ideas. It's about like the serious and deep engagement. And the response, the sort of outcome of that engagement could look a number of different ways, but the engagement is the piece that has to be there. It can't just be like, oh, we don't want to deal with this, so we're just gonna, throw it out the window. It's interesting because I find myself now more than ever in these conversations outside of the Reform movement. And what's actually interesting for me to see is how much struggle there is there as well. I remember once years back, an Orthodox rabbi saying to me that he doesn't envy us as Reformed Jews because he thinks that we actually have it much harder. Like, we have to think about all of this stuff that for him was much more of a given. He didn't have to think about this or that because that was just what his community norm was, and he followed it. But I'm going to say that what I'm seeing today, even in the Orthodox world, is struggle. That there is so much that is on the table for all of us, maybe in different ways. But we're all kind of trying to figure out where the parameters are, where the authenticity is, and where the real engagement is, and certainly in different ways. But I think one of the interesting things in the last 2 months is how much this pandemic life has raised a lot of these issues to the surface. So if you look at how really all the communities have struggled with this question, for example, of is an online minyan a real minyan, right? Like, can you say the things that you would only say in a minyan if your minyan is 10 different people at home, 10 different locations on their computer? Is that a minyan? Can you say Kaddish? Those kinds of questions. And we've answered it differently, somewhat, although not necessarily all that different. But it's been fascinating to see the struggle going on in each of the communities and to see how deeply all of us are still engaged with these questions of commandedness and, you know, what it means to be part of this tradition that has commandments, that has parameters, that has deep values about what is and isn't okay, even if we come out with different interpretations of that. And I'll say that's been very heartening, actually.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, you know, it makes me think one of the things that, as I sort of touched on a little bit in my opening remarks, one of the things that I think is especially moving to me about this topic is the sort of public, democratic, collective, communal experience of revelation, that they're certainly part of the revelation experience that is vertical, where, you know, God's up here and people are down here, and our job is to sort of be the receptacle to receive what God is delivering. But there's also this part of it that is deeply and intrinsically horizontal, that and I talk about it in the introduction as sort of collaborative revelation, that together we each need each other to contribute our own little bits of Torah so that we can assemble something that's comprehensive and meaningful and thoughtful and responsive to the world out there. And I now, you know, kind of going off of your responses to the last question, you know, there is a danger of getting overly enamored with the horizontal revelation. You know, Rabbi Person, to you, you know, to what you were saying a moment ago, there is, I think, always, I hope, going to be a role for rabbis, right? And so, as heartened as I've been also in the last few years to see the explosion of democratized Jewish learning. People are learning all kinds of stuff in all kinds of different formats, different online publications, blogs. People are learning on their phones. It's really amazing. Is there job security for rabbis and teachers? You know, what's the future of the Reform rabbinate in this newly democratized field of Jewish learning and study?
Oh boy, yeah. Great, complicated question. Well, yes, absolutely. I couldn't go to work every day if I didn't believe there was a future for rabbis, right? Yeah, because rabbis are the people who, you know, on the one hand, we do have this very democratic tradition, right? Like, we don't have divine revelation from God that we then share outward, right? I mean, some of us might, but, you know, basically we don't have that. You know, we're just among the people, right? We're members of the community, but we have a sort of sacred task that we have obligated ourselves to. And we have a certain level of learning, and we have a commitment to the greater endeavor of, you know, sort of moving the Jewish people forward and ensuring continuity and, you know, being a kind of translator of Jewish tradition into the future. And because I think in some ways it's sort of like we define that and it defines us. And by committing ourselves to that pursuit and, you know, to that endeavor, we provide something really critical for the community. It's not to say that only rabbis can be teachers or only rabbis know the right answers. God knows we don't always know the right answers, right? But, you know, we certainly work hard to know the right questions. And it's that very commitment to a life of these ideals and you know, sort of values and purpose that that we do help move the community forward in very important ways and sustain the community and are there for people in ways that really matter. So, you know, and on the other hand, we do have a tradition in which everybody can learn and we learn from each other, right? I mean, I know in my years of studying Torah week after week, you know, with an amazing group of people, boy, did I learn from them, right? It's not, you know, there is a two-way conversation going on that enriches everybody. So, you know, for all of the wonderful democratization of learning that's gone on in the last few years and will continue to go on, which is amazing and wonderful, hopefully that just opens the door then for greater engagement and greater commitment of everybody toward our sustainable future.
Right. Great. Yeah, I mean, I would say, and that's beautiful, not to gild the lily, I would say one of the things that the process of democratization, the process of sort of open access, unprecedented open access to Jewish text and Jewish resources, that it has actually, in my experience, has given me sort of a new appreciation, not just for rabbis, but I think for expertise. I think I find a new appreciation for people who, now that we've got access to all of this data and information, that I value even more the perspective of people who know how to make sense of all that data. And so one of the things that was so cool about the book is that, I'd never talked to an attorney about the commandment, not to steal. And I'd never talked to a technologist about the commandment to keep Shabbat and so on and so on, or to a police chaplain about the prohibition on murder. So, I think that while information is more information than ever before, I don't ever see an experience where expertise and the ability to filter or edit is going to go out of style. John, Rabbi Siger, any thoughts about the roles of rabbis or authority?
Well, I think it's interesting. One of the things that you and I share, and Hara, of course, as well. I mean, I don't know if directly, but with Hillel work, right back in the day, back in the olden times, the idea of engagement and empowerment, right? There's sort of this role of you're engaging people that may not otherwise have connection, and then you bring them along, and now you can empower them. Now that they're involved and they know a little bit, you can actually give them a little bit more responsibility. And rabbis are resources. We're supervisors, or we're supervisors of learning, or master teachers, and we help students along and model that learning for them, I would hope. So I think there's the role. I think it's definitely changing, and that's challenging. I mean, I'm concerned a little bit with sort of some of the democratization of leadership, where you can go online and suddenly I'm an expert. I'm an internet doctor of epidemiology and economics and public health, as well as rabbinics and astronomy and anything else that I had time to read Wikipedia about before this meeting. But I think that's also why it's so important to support our institutions. I mean, really, not to say that brand matters, but it does matter. I mean, it means something to be a member of the CCAR, to be a Musmach of HUC or JTS or any of the benchmark institutions. I think that's really important. And I think that doing this kind of work, putting the kind of quality that you all are doing, and let me sneak in there at the end, is critically important. And we should be encouraged by that. And I think the reason there's going to be a role for rabbis is because of other rabbis. I think if we rely on each other and on our communities, and the communities that love us and support us, the ones that get it and get what we're about, we'll be able to keep it going, and people will appreciate it. You're raising your customer base in a sense. I know that, again, maybe that sounds mercenary, but I mean it in a good way. One of the things that this reminded me of, if I may, just bring it back for a minute to that one aspect of the patrol chaplaincy that you'd asked about, which is fascinating to me, is especially when we talk about supervision. One of the things that's been fascinating to me is, as we've pushed for more body cameras, and everyone wants that, everyone wants the police to always have body cameras and make sure that you now have footage of every interaction that's out there. We want everything recorded. What that's done is taken away some of the discretion that an individual police officer might have, whether or not to prosecute or arrest someone for something. So for those of us that might be interested in seeing a reduction of drug prosecutions, or for loitering, for things like, oh, someone has, a joint on them. Well, it's on camera. It's illegal in this state. What's the police officer going to do without directions? There's a double-edged sword to some of this sense of, when you remove people's discretion, when you remove any authority, everything must be top down. And if we think about it, that's kind of like the reform argument in some ways too. Like, we have the supervision, we have the orders, but people are given a good amount of discretion. There are boundaries, there are supervisions, there are DAs and judges that have to oversee what's going on. That sort of becomes the rabbi's job, right? When we talk about yoreh, yadin, yadin, right? We're the ones who ultimately check in with people, and they say, was this kosher what I did? And say, well, let's define what you mean by kosher. And no, it wasn't a free range chicken, and that's really what matters. Was it sustainably grown? It doesn't matter what the Heckscher said. That kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if it moves the conversation further along or it fills air.
I want to go to one more question from the audience, and then move toward wrapping things up. And I'll take the liberty of answering this question. So the question came in: what was the hardest part of putting this book together? What was the best part? I can give sort of a flip answer, which would be to quote Dorothy Parker, who said something like, "The worst part is writing, the best part is having written." Well, there you have it. It feels really good to have written this book. The writing part was hard. Seriously, the hardest part, honestly, I think was just we had a lot of contributors. I think just the sort of very just the nitty gritty mechanics of wrangling so many different writers with so many different calendars and so many different demands on their time. It's very hard and very busy, and none of us certainly want to neglect or abandon our own day jobs and the holy work that we do most of the time. So it's hard. Rabbis are busy, scholars are busy, everyone who contributed were busy people, and that was probably the toughest thing. I'm very grateful to the editorial team at the press that did a lot of the chasing and shepherding. The best part was, as I said, just getting to sort of getting to spend time with these thinkers and these writers. I became a rabbi because I fell in love with Jewish learning. And to get to put together a book, which is in a sense, this is going to sound sort of meta, but the book is a celebration of learning about learning. So to get to spend time, and I talk a little bit about the sort of the fractal nature of Torah in the introduction to the book and the foreword. That was a great delight. That I love to learn and I love to teach, and to have as my subject matter learning and teaching. It was just a delight. It was just, I had a chance to really immerse myself in learning and commentaries and in extraordinary thought and insight from people much wiser than me. It was just a great delight, really, really a joy. So I want to move toward wrapping things up. I want to thank our guests again, Rabbi Siger, Rabbi Person, thank you so much for being with us. Jason, thank you for helping make tonight happen. A special thank you to Nathan, who's running tech behind the scenes. Appreciate you being here and making this accessible to all of our folks on Facebook, on the Temple website, and elsewhere. I want to say a word about getting the book into your hands and getting the book into use, which is really the most important thing for me. I want you to not get this book and just let it sit on the shelf. There you go. Thank you, Harry. You're seeing the very, very beautiful cover to this book. And I see it in the background of Rabbi Siger's home studio as well. So a word about how to get a hold of the book and how to use it. I am very happy to tell you that for the rest of this week, if you don't have a copy yet, if you haven't ordered yet, I want to invite you to go to the website for the book, which is inscribed.ccarpress.org. Again, inscribed.ccarpress.org. And this week, if you buy the book and at checkout, if you put in the promo code Inscribed20, Inscribed20, that'll get you an additional 20% off the price of the book. So I invite you to pick up a copy of the book. These are great graduation gifts as well, gifts for your friends and family. It's also available on Amazon if you're not able to get to it this week, or if the price is lower. It's available all over the place. I really hope that you'll manage to get a copy in your hands. And I promise you that once you've got your copy of the book, and as soon as we're allowed to be within 6 feet of each other, I would be delighted to sign your copy of the book if that's something that you would like. The other thing I'll share with you is that as we're getting ready to approach Shavuot, the celebration of Jewish learning and Jewish teaching, the CCAR Press has also put together a terrific study guide for the book. This is a digital download that you can get for free. That's also available on the CCAR Press website. It's a really useful way to enrich your understanding and your appreciation of the book. You can use it to dive deep into one or more of the commandments that you're more interested in, and get to know the work of some of these authors that you're that you're especially taken by. Again, thank you to everyone who's with us tonight. I'm so thrilled that I get a chance to share this work with you. I'm so delighted that you get to accompany me on this very sacred and very precious work that we're involved in, the work of Jewish learning, Jewish teaching, and the never-ending, always relevant engagement with Torah. Thanks for being with us tonight. It was really a joy to share tonight with you. I look forward to hearing about what you learn and what you teach from this new book.
Great.